Here we have gathered together some piles of different materials. Some are tough and will add air, like these wood chips and sawdust. Others are soft and full of water, like these grass cuttings and kitchen peelings. Be mindful of your materials and always think in terms of adding air or water. Mixing the materials together is best, but in practice layering is often easier. Try and mix up the different materials as much as possible, especially the tough dry materials with the soft wet materials. You are creating the ideal environment for all the microbes, especially bacteria, fungi, and then all the mini beasts which will come to your heap. Because I had a lot of tough woody chips in this heap, I'm making sure to add plenty of water, and I've been tamping the heap down as well as I go. Next I'm going to remove the compost bin to show the contents, and you can see the layering quite clearly there. Composting is all about getting the balance between air and water and being mindful of your materials. Now I've put the bin back and take the temperature with my probe thermometer, which is 20 degrees Celsius today, April the 7th. Much hotter today. Let's see what the temperature's like on the thermometer. Wow, well, that's interesting. It's gone up from 20 to just under 30 in 24 hours. Good stuff. Okay, so that's the temperature, ambient temperature in the shade today, just above 20 degrees. So significantly hotter in the compost. So it's 48 hours since we built the heap. Let's see what the temperature is today. Wow. Blimey. 50 degrees Celsius. It's been very hot, but cold at night. It's a small bin. And the ambient temperature I took earlier was about 22. But that's pretty impressive. 50 degrees. Wow. And it's, as you can see, it's over 60, what's that, 62, 63 degrees Celsius. That's pretty hot. Let's see if we can get this Dalek bin to melt down. Come back tomorrow. 96 hours since we put the heap together. I've just put the thermometer in. It was 60 yesterday. So it's dropping a bit. It's only just on 55 today. So it's already starting to drop a bit. You can see it's gone, the level has dropped down. So it's dropped down, can you see that? Dropped down that hand span, dropped down that much. The outside temperature is 20 degrees today. So it's a bit cooler. It was really hot yesterday. Okay, so I just thought, it seems it's pulled away from the sides quite a lot. Maybe we'll have a look at how it's doing inside, if I can lift it up, okay? Give it a go. Too difficult to get it. There we are. Whoa. It's because of that bit in the bottom. Well, I'll put it back together again. You can see where the air's got in round the door. I don't like these doors here. I'll have another look tomorrow. So it's day 6 and the compost has been cooking for 120 hours now. It was at 55 yesterday. Let's see what it is today. So it is, can you see that? It's dropped a tiny bit, so it's about 54 degrees Celsius. So it's cooking away nicely. So it's a week since we built this bin, and let's look at the temperature today. Yesterday it was, what was it, 55? Yep, today it's only 45, so it's definitely dropping down quite a bit. But can you see that all right? 45. But look at the way, look how much it's dropped down. So it's dropped down, what's that, 9 inches or something, in a week. And it's pulled away from the side. Shall I pull it away again to have a look at that? Put it up again. Starting to darken down, isn't it?
Yeah.
Starting to change. Apart from around the door, where it's useless door. Right, put that back again.
So you've made a wonderful mixture of compost in the cone. How long is it going to take to rot down?
Well, we're going to have to wait to see, aren't we? But it heated up very quickly, didn't it? It went from 20 degrees, which was the ambient temperature on the first day, then it went 30, then it went up to 50, and then nearly 60, very quickly in a few days. And then it started to drop down again, went down to 55, 50, and now it's dropping down again a week and a bit later. So that first phase of composting is when the bacteria are doubling every hour, and that's why it gets so hot, because you get that doubling every hour. And so that means that one bacterial colony can get up to over 8 million in 24 hours. So that's an incredible explosion of life. As long as there's enough air and there's enough water for the biology to happen, for the bugs to multiply, then you get that bacterial explosion. And then what happens is that the secondary composters start to move in. You get the other things coming in, and lots of other organisms that are attracted to the heap. So you get the fungi coming in, and they're a lot slower. You get the shredders, the creatures that are shredding things up, and all the other creatures that get in. In fact, you get every single kingdom of life involved in the compost heap. And that takes a long while then to mature, especially to work on the harder, woody stuff. That can take months and months and months. So we're just going to have to be patient and leave it, which is why we're always thinking like 6 months to a year ahead of what we're doing.
And who's in a hurry anyway?
No, exactly. Exactly.
And what will we use the compost for? What's it best for?
We use it. It's garden compost, so it's got had a little tiny bit of kitchen stuff in it mixed in, but it was just a few peelings and things just put in there. But this will be used on the beds just to top dress our beds mainly, and because we have a no-dig system, those chunky woody chips, which still won't be broken down even after a year, some of them are very big chunky bits, they will become a nice mulch on the bed. And if we're bothered about them, we can rake off some of the bigger bits and put it back in. It's not a problem.
And so you put in just a small amount of kitchen peelings on that. With that amount, it's not really a rat problem then.
No.
It would be if you put in more.
Yeah, exactly. If we had a lot of food waste, and especially if we've got things like potato peelings, carrot peelings, if we got any cooked food, that's what really attracts the rats. A little tiny bit in there is not going to be a problem. I'm sure it won't within that, because it heated up very quickly. You know, it's not going to be a problem. It's when you add things every day. Because the other way of making compost, of course, is to add a little bit at a time, and that's when you start to get problems. You know, so our other heap that we've got, we are adding things a little bit at a time, but we've got a special rat-proof bin for that one. So this is what we're just demonstrating to get the biology right, to get the mixture between air and water, to show that rapid expansion, that rapid heat rise that happens, and to show that first bit of the composting, because a lot of people want to know, how do you get a hot heap? Well, you have to do it like that in one go and make sure you've got the balance of air and water, and that's crucial to keep it going. And then when that's starting to slow down, that's when then the worms move in as well, and the worms will take months and months and months to finish it off.
Will you keep adding to it as it sinks down?
We could do, but I'm just going to leave that one to finish now. I'm just going to leave it. But we could keep adding to it. And actually, I mean, if we were going to do that, it would have been better to do it when it was hotter and keep it cooking more and more. Now it's cooling down. We could invigorate it and get it going, but just going to do this one now as a bit of an experiment and as a demonstration to see what happens without adding to it.
And what about roots like couch and bindweed roots? Will that heat kill things like that and the seeds?
Well, it's all a matter of proportion. I mean, if we had a little bit of bindweed in there and it was hot, when it was hot getting up to 60 degrees, that would have cooked it,
Yeah.
you know. But if we got a lot of bindweed, a lot of cooch, and especially if it's got a lot of earth with it, the earth will insulate it against the heat. It's better to take those out, and we've got another container where we're just putting the roots and excluding the light from it. And that again, I'm going to leave that for about a year.
Yeah, quite often we put the roots out on the path to dry out if it's sunny, don't we?
Yeah.
So they dry out and hopefully are dead before we compost them anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very exciting.
It's all right. Now you've got a cat on your lap. You can't turn the.
Can't move.
Can't move. So just sit here till the cat's bored.
Okay, so we've got a question from Susan here. She's got a couple of questions. Is all types of food waste okay to throw on your heap?
Well, that's one of the ones that it depends. Really, if you're doing food waste is always the big issue I have, and I've become a bit of a specialist on food waste because of advising schools and other organisations. So obviously, food waste can attract rats and flies, and can be very smelly and can be very problematic. So you have to be very mindful of how you do it. So down on the Proper Job site, we've got a big board, haven't we, which shows some different systems for dealing with food waste particularly. So you can, it kind of depends on the amount. Obviously the raw food waste is less problematic generally, but rats will eat potato peelings and carrot peelings, and if you peel your carrots, which I don't, but things like that, they will eat. They eat pretty much anything anyway. So you're just going to be attracting them. So you have to come up with other solutions. There are plenty of solutions. I've got loads of them in my books. There's the Bokashi system, which is a fermentation system. You can have a wormery to put a small amount in every day. You can have tumbling bins, which you use. And down on the Proper Job site, we've got a thing called a ride-down, which is it's expensive. I mean, it's a big machine that's really for schools and institutions. But you can, as long as you can keep rats out all completely. So your pallet bin would be pretty hopeless for that. And they'll get into a Dalek bin, like I demonstrated with, very easily too. So it's one of those things that, yes, you can do it. And if you've got it hot, you've got a nice hot heat going, and you've got some fresh stuff, and you put it in, and you're in this time of year onwards, and it's nice and hot like it was in the video, and then you cover it up with some grass cuttings or something like that, or some cardboard, or even newspaper, then it's probably going to be all right. But it's always a little bit, risky unless you know what you're doing.
Okay. So I think, the trick seems to be layering it all up and mixing it together.
Yeah.
So what about, so we've had another kind of invasive weed question. What about bindweed and couch grass?
Oh, well, I did that already.
Yeah, similar. So yeah. Similar, kind of, it's just to,
so you dry it out, drown it, yeah. or exclude the light, or all three.
Do you need to turn it regularly? How often? So how often would you turn?
Well, I don't turn mine at all. But this is where I differ from quite a lot of. I mean, I'm on a Keep Calm and Make Compost Facebook group, and they're all manic turners. They seem to love getting out there and digging into their compost and turning it. And I used to do that, but unless you want to do it as a space issue, like on the Proper Job site, we turn the heaps with the tractor. And it's partly to accelerate the composting process, and partly to create more space for fresh arisings all the time. So it's a management issue. Personally, I fill a bin. I have really good structure in it. So I have a lot of wood chip. I have a lot of twiggy stuff. The air's going to pump through all the time. And as long as I'm mindful that it's not, you can get too airy, can get too structural, and then you get molds, which we used to get at Proper Job in the early days before we realized, because we had a lot of woody waste. And so it can get too dry, And then you can actually, got to be very careful turning it, because you can get the kind of molds that are associated with farmer's lung, Aspergillus fumigatus, which grows in sort of musty, dry, musty, moldy environments. And so you've got to actually be you've got to be quite mindful of that. If you start turning your compost and it's dry and musty, then you want to stop and soak it, water it right, wet it right down, absolutely flood it with water and leave it alone. If you are in a hurry, yeah, like I say, if you've got heavy dense materials like manures, for instance, then it has been shown that if you make a manure pile and then turn it after 4 days, and then turn it again after another 4 days, and then again, then you can actually go from sort of manure to compost very, very quickly with heavy, dense, nitrogen-rich materials. But you know, there's all kind of exceptions to particular materials. But personally, I leave mine alone.
Okay, thank you. So with yours, how long is it before you can use it? So from your day one of making it, how long will it be until you use that?
Well, that's an interesting one. Again, it does depend a bit on which materials you put in, obviously.
And that was the next question, was what materials did you put into that specific heap? Because it got hot very quickly. That was a question from
Well,
John.
I put yeah, it's a bit difficult to see, wasn't it? There were quite a lot of very chunky woody chips, so they were pretty tough, chunky wood chips, and there was quite a lot of sawdust shavings from a furniture maker. There was a bucket full of kitchen. I didn't know much kitchen stuff. I put a bucket in early on. There was quite a lot of grass and weeds and scythings and that kind of thing that went in. So it's the mixture between the soft, fresh, sappy stuff and the hard, dry stuff. So that's the water and the air, which is always constantly. I do workshops where I do mindfulness of composting, and we look at the different materials you can pick out of a garden and trying to decide whether it's going to add air, whether it's going to add water, how it's actually going to behave, how long is it going to break down. And obviously those really chunky bits of wood are going to take a long time to break down. So even after the compost when the rest of it's all finished, you'll still get those really hefty chunks coming out. And I don't mind about that, because I'm a no-dig gardener, so I spread it on the surface. I either spread it on the surface, or sometimes I sieve out a bit, but mostly I just spread it on the surface, and it just becomes a mulch on the top of the ground. So you don't get this, people talk about nitrogen robbery, you don't get that. And so as for time, well, I actually was going to do, on part 2 of the film, I was thinking, won't it be quite fun? Now it's cooling down, and now it's getting into squash time, and I've got quite a lot of squashes. I think what I'm going to do is take the cover off and plant a load of plants into my compost heap. I'm going to plant squashes, maybe a tomato or 2, and just turn it into a kind of vertical bed and see what happens. I've done it with woody stuff, long-term woody stuff, and I've just dug little holes and then filled that with a bit of compost and stuck a squash in. So you can get squashes growing on your compost heaps as well when they're active if you leave them. So don't just leave them, but use them as well.
Would that not take the nutrients out? Sorry, I'm asking questions. I'm jumping
That's
in.
right. No, it probably takes a bit out, but yeah, I mean, it takes a bit out, but that's fine. The thing is, there's a bit of a misconception actually about nutrients in compost, because compost doesn't actually add a lot of nutrient. People seem to be a bit obsessed about nutrients and fertilizer and fertilizing their soil, but actually what compost does, what you really want is a healthy soil. And your healthy soil is very analogous to your compost of air and water. So compost has got air, primary things is air, water, living organic matter. That's all the life that you saw in the little living film, and dead organic matter. That's what compost is. Whereas soil's got the 5th element, which is the mineral substrate of your soil. It's got all those other 4, but then it's got the mineral that you're on. So if you're on a clay soil, you've got a clayey soil, obviously. If you're on a sandy soil, you've got that. So, but air, water, and life is what you really want in your soil. And compost helps to keep your soils healthy. And it doesn't particularly add lots and lots of nutrient, but it just keeps adding the nutrients kind of added in the form of the life, if that makes sense. That's how I think of it, you know. Seems to work for me.
Thank you. So
Did
I've got a question from Debbie. Hello, I have a compost bin, but I've never really used it properly, so I'd like to learn about it. So was that a compost bin like Nicky was using in the video? No.
Press
Debbie.
your space bar, Debbie.
Ah. Oh.
You have to press your space bar on your computer.
Or I can probably unmute you, Debbie. One sec.
You unmute her.
Oh, unmute.
Thank you.
There we are.
It's one of those Dalek bin things, a black bin, and it came with the house. When we moved in, it was here, and that was 5 years ago. And I put the odd bit of grass cuttings and things in it over the 5 years, and I used a bit of it this year, and it seems it's all full of worms and life and everything. It's lovely. So I want to be able to use it properly, and I've been sticking in vegetables and things like that. But
Debbie missed the video, didn't you?
Yeah, I was just thinking you missed the video, which is all about that.
So Debbie, we'll send you the video after this, and make sure that you've got that. So that really explains how to use one of those little Dalek.
Oh, perfect.
So hopefully that will answer.
And I've also got on YouTube, if you look up my name and composting, you'll see I made a video. Well, they've actually made it into 4 videos from the Teambridge District Council, which was all about how to use a Dalek bin.
Fabulous.
I've got it here somewhere. I should have got it ready. Where is it? Somewhere I've got one. Anyway.
No, that's fine. I can look it up. Thank you.
So a question from Ruth. Would you shred everything that you put in? I add everything whole. That's what she.
Well, if it's a log, you know. Yeah. No, you don't shred. I have actually got a little shredder. I do, but I don't get it. I got given it, a little electric one, but it's a bit of a pain to use. But I do use it occasionally with certain things. It kind of crushes more than chips up. So they can be useful. If you've got space though, just chop it. It depends what sort of things you're thinking about, Ruth, but you know, things like big thick brambles and I don't know, hedge prunings and stuff like that. You can just chop it up, and you can make a kind of very long-term windrow, which is what I do. A windrow is just a pile that's elongated, so you get a long pile, and you can stomp up and down on it, and you can add as much green stuff as you like. And that's actually my favorite bit of composting, doing that one. Does that answer that, Ruth?
Yeah, I think so. I think I often add, hard woody stuff, but I don't really cut it up particularly small, and just find that it's often left as big lumps. But if I'm just going to use it as mulch, that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. And also, if you're what I do is when I'm pulling out heaps like that, you do get some really big. I get some pretty big chunky bits. Well, I just put them to the side. They just go on the bottom again, and it just goes around again. But I find it's a really good haven for amphibians and reptiles. I had a lovely slow worm there just now, actually, just before I came down. Beautiful slow worm found there. So they're great habitats in their own right.
Yeah.
And all the kind of beetles that like to be in there, so they're also alive with life.
Okay. Wonderful. So I've got a question from Roger here. I think it's Claire on Roger's account. I have rats in my compost who seem to do a lot of the processing of the content. Any comments? And
Yeah, and something else?
No, that was I've just missed one from Patricia, but I'll go back to that in a second. That's fine. I missed a question. So yes, rats doing the work for you.
We actually thought of providing compost bins with tame white rats at one point, because they're very good at turning the compost. They aerate it and they tunnel through it, and they're actually pretty good workers. But I'm not particularly fond of rats, and they have scared the life out of me sometimes when jumping out at me, which is why I designed and built rat-proof bins, the Scotty hot boxes for processing food waste. So yeah, obviously, you know, they're not that bad. They're very maligned species. They really don't often, you know, cause a lot of problems. One of the projects I got involved with was in London, in Hackney, where they were overrun with rats on their estate, and we got them composting, and actually the composting got rid of the rats, strangely enough, because before they had lots of food waste spilling out and of the big Paladin bins on these big high-rise, and there was food that was really attracting rats and lots of other, and cockroaches and all sorts of other things. So the project collected up the food waste and gave the residents bokashi, which is the other food waste solution, which is a really good one, which is a fermentation solution. So, and then you don't get the rats. But of course, if you do have rats, it always comes up in compost talks, and they can carry Weil's disease. So if you've got cuts or anything, you know, it can get into you through that. So you've always got to be very careful to wash your hands very carefully. We're all very used to washing our hands at the moment, so just wash your hands when you've been handling compost, because rats and mice pee all the time and they spread their stuff around. So do be aware of that. Does that answer your question, Claire?
I think so. I'm not that worried about them either, but when you said that they'll eat all your peelings, I did think all my lovely kitchen waste is going into the rats rather than into the compost, but
yeah,
it comes out in poo in the end, and pee, you know.
Exactly. It will. They'll concentrate it for you.
Thank you.
So I got a question from Patricia. It's like, can you compost onions and garlic and potatoes?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of. I was going to write a little booklet once about all the things I've read that they say you can't compost from. You know, onions, rhubarb leaves, all these things that you can't compost. But actually, if you think about it, you know, we would be overrun with all these things if they didn't break down and compost. So yes, you can. I think that people always say that worms don't like onions in wormeries, and that's a particular situation. Potato peelings can often grow because, you know, if you cut the eyes out of a potato, they can grow. And also rats love potato peelings. But I've done wormeries for years, and I've shoved everything in, and I've never noticed that the worms seem to be fussy about onion skins or anything for that matter. So I've tried absolutely everything, and it all seems to be fine. There is the proviso, though. I mean, anything you have in quantity. So it's always good to think about this. So if you were a fanatical juicer and you drink masses and masses of citrus, and you've got loads of citrus skins, or you're picking up stuff from a smoothie bar, whatever, and you've got bag loads of the stuff, you've got to be mindful about how that's going to balance with other materials. We call it co-composting. I was at Guy Watson, who's the Riverford Farm guy down here. He was getting a ton of shellfish waste every day from Brixham. That is a lot of shellfish waste to deal with, and very smelly. So you have to be prepared to have an equal quantity of something else to immediately mix it with. So he was actually mixing it with smashed up old sort of discarded wooden packing crates, the ones that had come to the end of their life. And they were all being smashed up and smashed together and then put into big heaps. And when I went, you couldn't really smell it that much. It wasn't too bad. So it's the same with anything. Load of citrus, think of what you're going to mix with it to balance it out, you know, or whatever it is. You know, loads of couch grass. We were talking about couch grass. You can compost a little bit of couch grass, but if you've got loads of it, then you've got to think about another strategy of how to deal with it. Just be thoughtful about how these things are going to work together. Does that answer that, Patricia? Yeah, good. Got the thumbs up.
So Madalena has asked, can you compost herbs that have been used to dye fabric? We might need to explain.
Just Monica, isn't it?
Oh yes, it is.
Yes, Monica and Madalena, hello. it's a sort of, which herbs are you using? Just out of interest.
Maybe cosa usiamo?
Say it in Italian.
Tarassaco, non so, tarassaco, or maybe chamomilla, or
Tarassaco is
waste of agricultural, like onion,
Onion skin.
onion skin,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
maybe carciofi, non so,
Artichokes.
artichokes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all of that. All of that.
Boiled long time, boiled
Yeah.
long time, and the rest I waste or
Yes.
in the
Yeah,
sea.
absolutely.
Okay.
But you're going to have, so it's going to be quite wet, obviously. So again, think about how you can mix it with something dry, something that's going to add some air into it as well. So it's going to be quite sludgy, you know, like fangle. So you want to change it with something to aerate it. Do you understand? Does that?
Exactly. Yes.
Capito, sì.
And my daughter helped me. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Nikki.
Okay.
So I've got a message from Sarah here. So a couple of questions. As well as a Dalek bin, I've got a dumpy bag that I've just started using. Any advice on this, or anything I should be considering that's different to using plastic bins?
I don't think I've ever used a dumpy bag apart from doing leaf mold. So I filled them with leaves in the past and just left them, because leaves are a really brilliant resource in there, because that's something else that you get large quantities of, obviously, in the autumn, lots and lots of leaves, and on their own they are brilliant. So if you can put them into dumpy bags, or just, I use fertilizer sacks actually, or any kind of containers, or just contain them somewhere, it doesn't really matter, they will slowly get broken down with fungi. And then they are the most fantastic resource for the other brilliant thing about compost, which is making your own potting compost. So that's what I do with that. But as for making compost in a dumpy bag, no, I mean, I think it's probably quite a good idea. You've got posts in the court holding it up. Yeah, so you've got 4 posts holding it up. I think that would be fine. That would be fine. Just do it the same way. It's just another way, any way that you can have to contain materials is helpful, you know. And you can pile it right up high above as well, you know, and it will break down. But as I say, if you've got anyone listening, do make your own leaf mold, because I've had so many comment or questions recently about where can we get compost during the lockdown. People have run out of compost. So to make your own with leaf mold and a bit of your own sieved compost, a bit of soil from your garden or from molehills, and some sand. I get sand out of our leat because they dredge it. They need to dredge it out anyway, but a bit of river sand is fantastic. You mix them roughly equal proportions, and we've been growing everything on that. All our seedlings are coming up on that. You do get quite a lot of weed seeds coming up, well, other wildflowers. Anyway, does that answer that one, Sarah?
Yeah, can I would you recommend covering the dumpy bag? You know, so
yeah, well, that's another kind of $64,000 question, really. The covering and not covering. It's always the problem we have at Proper Job, isn't it? When it pours with rain. So the thing is, when the compost is very active, when you're like in my video, it's getting very hot. It's obviously pumping out lots of moisture, so lots of water vapors coming off. And it can dry out. The heap can just actually really dry out. It gets so hot, all the water just goes up into the atmosphere. So it's good to catch it and condense it and recycle it within the bin as much as possible. As it's getting more and more mature through time, then sometimes you want to, sometimes you want to take the cover off to dry it out a bit, maybe. But also you also want to cover it to stop the rain getting in. So it's a bit of a game. But the whole game of composting really is this balance between air and water all the time, all the way through. and so you want to be aware of, you know, some you dig into it every now and again is quite good, and just see, is it actually composting or is it dried out too much? Do I need to water it? Or if it's going to rain, should I just take the cover off and let the rain get in? And then, or if it's too wet, shall I cover it up to stop the rain getting in? You know, there's all those kind of questions you have to ask yourself, really. It's a bit like with cookery, you know, you have to just be aware and mindful the whole time of what you're doing. It's, you know, mostly it looks after itself, but you just have to, you know, be aware of it. It's a living, breathing organism, really, you know.
So I've got another question from Sarah
Is that
about yeah. So there was a number 2 from Sarah. My neighbours give me their chicken and goat manure along with the straw bedding. Can I just add that to my compost?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Especially, and if you've got the manure and the bedding, that's the key. And what's the bedding made of?
It's straw, but
straw.
There's quite a lot more of it than there is of the poo. It's just like loads of straw and then a bit of poo.
Yeah, well, that'd be pretty good. I mean, the urine will be in it and it will have dried up a bit probably, so it might be, you might need to water it, and again layer it, you know, to try and spread these materials out in thin layers. And if it's light and fluffy, tamp it down a bit like I was doing in the film. If it's heavy and dense, then don't, you know, try and fluff it up a bit, you know. So just, again, it's always that thing, air and water, and mindful of those kind of issues.
Okay, great.
Yeah. That'd be great stuff. That'd be brilliant.
Thanks.
So we've got a message from Fred here. Hi Nikki, Fred from EcoCops here.
It's Fred. I just saw Julia. It doesn't look like Julia. Hi Fred.
I can just see him having a beer in his garden.
Yeah.
I'm really jealous. I should have done it the other
Where's my
way.
beer, Fred?
So they've just got a puppy. Oh, we want to see the puppy. We want to see. So we've just got a puppy, and I feel confident with composting, and have 3 green Jonas, and was wondering if there was any problem with me composting puppy poo.
Oh, what a great question. Yeah, I'll have to get my little lamb up to show you all in a minute, I think. The puppy poo. Well, no, nice to see you, Fred. I think, oh, look at that. Wow. Well, didn't see much of it wriggling around.
Yeah.
People get very worried about dog poo and animal poo and human poo, and you know, but actually you can compost all of them. I've been composting my own poo for over 30 years with a human manure compost bin, and it's fine. You've got to be aware, obviously, again, you've got to be aware of certain parasites, especially with dogs and cats. You've got toxoplasma and the other one, which I can't remember the name of, but they've got parasites which can be carried. So it's always that thing of always being mindful and washing your hand. But you know, poo in a active compost bin that's going to go, the pathogens are all going to be killed off at the temperatures that I had in my Dalek bin. They're going to be gone in minutes or hours. Most pathogens will be gone. Roundworms are the most tricky one to kill off, but if you've got a hot bin, it's also over time. So if you leave it long enough before you use it, then it's you know, it's like a year. If it's been above ambient temperature, it's fine. It's one of the reasons why I'm never in a rush to get my compost out, actually, because I do add human manure to my compost, and I would add puppy poo, and there's a bit of lamb poo going in at the moment because we've got a lamb here we're looking after. Although most of it seems to go on the carpet.
So talking of poo, you can't have a compost talk without poo coming up somewhere, can you? That was a guinea pig poo. So yeah, same thing.
Oh yeah, guinea pig poo is fine. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
perfect.
Yeah. I don't think there's any problems with guinea pigs.
So a message here from Ruth about starting up a community composting scheme, or she said, or should we chat about that another time? I mean, do you want to talk about that, Nicky?
Well, I could talk about it a bit. I mean, it's interesting that, I mean, one of the reasons I got so obsessed with composting was because of every time I went up on my allotment, somebody seemed to be lighting a bonfire. And so it was bonfires, pollution that really spurred me on to trying to get a communal project going. And that, and the fact that it was just such an enormous waste of resources that people were throwing garden waste in. Back where we live in Chapwood, people used to throw it into skips, and it would all be mixed up with everything else and then going into landfill. So that was the impetus. That and the fact that I'm a no-dig gardener and I actually wanted lots of compost. They were the sort of three things that really spurred me on to forming a community composting group. And then from that, the community composting network, and then the national network, and all sorts of things followed. So yeah, there's obviously quite a lot involved in setting up a composting project. And I've got on my shelf here, which you can't see, but I've got whole manuals. I've done 3-day courses on how to set up a community composting project. So there's quite a lot involved. So yeah, let's have a separate talk, Ruth. But anyone else who's interested, please do get in touch with me, because I can talk about, well, as you can probably imagine, I can talk about compost endlessly.
Well, also in the chat, we were going to ask in the chat whether there was anything anyone could think of, any other workshops that, or anything that people want to know, or anything that can help you all through lockdown. We are currently looking at getting some funding so that we can host more of these workshops. So any feedback from any of you as to what you need in order to make your own compost, but also to reduce, reuse and recycle at home, we'd love your ideas. So yeah, setting up a community composting project could be something that we could put together maybe.
I just wanted to add that I think that, so I'm a town councillor in North Taunton, and that's not why I'm interested in home composting. Nicky knows me quite well. I work for Devon Wildlife Trust, but one of the things that we'd like to see is, because we've declared a climate emergency, is it's a way that we could potentially be working more with local residents.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, the amount of waste that's just burn, the amount of people complaining about bonfires at the moment, and I do think it's quite important. So that I think if you circulated that to a few parish clerks in in Devon, you'd get a lot of interest.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay, yeah, great. Well, maybe not, I mean, because the great thing about the Zoom is we can do it all over. We've got people in Italy and Kent and London, you know, so we can do it all over the place, which is brilliant.
Yeah,
I don't know how Fred's getting on with his community work with EcoCops, but well, I do know a bit, but he's doing great stuff in Kent, you know. There's lots going
on. So I've got another one for hi Nicky, you mentioned that turning breaks the fungal network. However, I understood that turning is important to air the bin.
Yeah, well, as I explained, it's I think it's a bit of a myth. I mean, I know in the composting fraternity, I am a bit of a maverick. So I'm a non-turner, I'm a no-digger non-turner, and I think they're kind of analogous, really. So yes, you've got to have the air, but actually the air is there through the structure that you build into the compost heap right from the start. That's why my little film at the beginning was so important, to show how you're building in the structure through the tougher woody materials all the way through, and then the air can get right from the bottom to the top of the heap. People talk about, you know, it's important to have gaps in the side to let the air in. Well, that's nonsense, because it won't penetrate in very far. All that does is dry out the bits where the gaps are. So you just get dry bits. And in fact, you saw in my film that where the door was, there was a dry bit which wasn't composting, because it had just dried out in that spot. So the really important thing is to build it in. You can turn, if you really want to turn, and if you want to accelerate the compost. So I haven't really mentioned this, but compost basically breaks down into two main sort of time zones, if you like. There's the first bit, which is shown in the film very clearly, where you build a heap and it rises in temperature very, very quickly. And what's happening there is that the bacteria are operating very rapidly in the beginning. So bacterial colonies can double every hour, which means that if you've got one bacterial colony, you obviously would have loads, but if you had just one, after 24 hours, that has become over 8 million. So you get this exponential, that's exponential numbers for you. It's similar to the way viruses spread. So you're getting that heat generated within the heap. Now, if you then monitor, like I was doing with a compost thermometer, and as it started to dip down, if I had taken that heap and turned it over and returned it and heated it up again, it would have mixed the materials together, would have been probably very beneficial actually, and it would have reheated again. And you could do that times in the beginning, but once it started to cool off and it's not reheating, there's absolutely no point in turning it at all, because it's going into the next phase of composting, which is the maturation phase. When it's cooling down, that's when the compost worms like to move into it and the fungi start to take over, particularly on the cellulose, the woody stuff. So the fungi are attacking that. So yes, it's quite good, can be beneficial to turn it in the early phases, but not in the later phases. Does that clarify that? Hopefully.
So
everyone looks a bit dazed.
So I've got a message
Fred's
from
falling off
Don.
his chair. Sorry.
Presumably, ground elder should be treated the same as bindweed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything like that, all those kind of things. Yeah. The other thing you can do, I was talking to someone about this today actually. There are certain weeds like bindweed, ground elder, even Russian comfrey, which I used, but it's very difficult to get rid of if you've got it, is you can turn that, you can actually mow it. So you can turn those areas into a bit of lawn, if you like, and just mow it and mow it and mow it. Nothing will stand, only grasses can really stand mowing. A lot of our plants that you find in lawns, like dandelions and hawkweeds and stuff like that, have got rosettes which lay really flat in the ground, so they kind of miss the blades. But things like ground elder and bindweed will get chopped off, and so they will weaken over time and die. Bracken as well is another one. So you can do that.
So another similar question, so from Ruth, it's about the Dalek bins, about so how long will it take for the compost to be usable?
That's another, yes, I mean, it's always, it's another one of those it depends things. I mean, if the one that I started to do could be ready in as little as 6 months, you know, sort of fairly properly. And in fact, I'm going to I will plant into it in a few weeks. I'm going to experiment with planting into it and growing some squashes in it. It sort of depends on how ready you need it and want it. There are certain things that you can spread the compost on before it's completely finished. But normally at this time of year, it would take about 6 months. If you started it towards, you know, the end of the season, towards sort of September or something, it's probably going to take more like 9 months. It just depends on the size. Also, it depends on the size of the heat, because obviously Dalek bins are very small. They're only 1/5 of a cubic meter, roughly, usually. So they lose a lot of heat. Unless you've got green Joannas, like Fred has, the green Joannas are a bit bigger. And if he's got duvet. You've got duvets on you, green Joannas, Fred? Put your thumb up. No, you can't hear me.
No, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, at the moment, obviously with the temperatures being warm, I've taken my sort of outer coverings off because they're sort of, you know, and I'm not concerned about them losing heat. But yeah, I mean, the thing about the green Johannas is I literally throw everything in them. The only thing I just wanted to ask you about was the puppy poo, and you've covered that, which is, you know, to me a fantastic opportunity, because, you know, those people who've got dogs and are worried what to do with the poo and when, you know, in their gardens and stuff, if it's just another reason to home compost. You know, you turn that resource into something usable that you can down the line use in the garden, and that's why I have 3 green Johannas to give them time to mature so that when I actually do want to use the contents, you know, I'm talking about 12 months, like you said, that would definitely be my sort of advice to people.
Oh, thanks, Fred. The Green Johanna, or Johanna, as it's properly pronounced, is a fantastic bin. They're quite expensive, Swedish ones, but they are very good. They're bigger. They're Dalek shaped, but they're a lot bigger, and you can get a special Swedish Green Johanna duvet for the winter to keep them warm in the winter. On the dog poo one, just an addendum to that. My friend Chris Chapman, who lives here, he asked me about this years ago, and he designated one of his Dalek bins special just for his dog poo, because he had 2 dogs and they were pooing all over the garden. So he put dog poo and grass cuttings and some of the chicken litter in there, and then he uses just that just on his ornamental and things that he's not going to eat to be doubly safe. And he says it's brilliant. He loves it.
Can I just say one final thing, Nicky, about the Green Johannas? So yeah, they are the more expensive of the options out there, but you know, it's worth going to the Great Green Systems website and putting your postcode to see if your local council are subsidising it. I know Canterbury are in Kent, and they're subsidising it up to 40%. So it's definitely worth taking a look at. And if all else fails, if you put in the EcoCops in the promo code, you'll get 33% off. So just a shout out for anyone who's a bit concerned about the cost, and just to consider that as an option.
Very nice.
Oh, great. Thanks, Fred. That's brilliant.
Wonderful.
That's really good.
So we've got another kind of 20 minutes left, so I'm going to round up with the questions that are on here. Okay. John, what sort of woody materials is okay? Small branches, twigs, wood and ash. Is that okay?
Yeah, obviously if you're talking about branches, you're getting a bit big. So branches would normally either go into a shredder and be shredded up for chips. I mean, anything, again, it's the mindfulness thing, John. So you can have quite a fat sort of stalk of a cabbage, can't you? Which is quite tough, but you can bash it about a bit and that will compost quite well. Or you can have quite a thin stem of a holly or a cotoneaster or something, which is really dense and hard, but it can be a lot smaller. So it's like the toughness and the quality of the woody material itself. So some things definitely you would need to put through a shredder or make a kind of long-term wildlife heap from it. So it's one of those questions that's tricky to answer definitively. You just have to know the quality of the material a bit, but you can't go shoving whole branches or logs into your compost. So it's also to do, you know, with surface area. So if you shred something up, you massively increase the surface area, which allows the bacteria, the fungi, all the everything in the compost to get to work on it. Does that answer that, do you think? Press your space bar, John.
Oh, shall I?
Press the big bar and talk at the same time.
Ash. Wood ash.
Wood ash.
Oh, wood ash. I thought you meant ash trees. Wood ash is yeah, I mean, wood ash you can generally, because you get that in the winter. What I do with mine is I store it in a metal bucket around the back of the shed in the dry, keep it dry. This is what I do. There are other things you can do. And then I tend to spread it. In fact, you've reminded me to get it out. I tend to spread it around things like my raspberries, raspberry canes, and other fruit bushes because it's high in potash. It's not great to add to the compost per se. Some people do, some people don't. There's a bit of a debate about it. I only add small amounts at any one time. I always think of it like a chemical fertilizer, using it because it's very soluble. There's no organic matter left in it. It's just minerals, isn't it? But it's quite high potash, so it is useful. I do sometimes make char, biochar, but that's a whole other topic really. But you know, bits of charcoal or half burnt bits of wood are very good in the compost. So you can sieve them out and put them in, and there's a whole other discussion to be had on biochars and stuff like that. It's very good.
Thank you
Any
very
more
much.
questions? Or was that answer that?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So a question here, another question from Claire. Can you say something about long-term huge compost heaps like permaculture, Jean Paint? I'm not quite sure, or Jean Pain. Yeah.
Jean Pain, yeah. Oh, well, Jean Pain is fantastic. You should go and I watched one of his films the other day, actually. Jean Pain was, I've got one of his books here. I don't know if I can find it. He's absolutely inspirational. He used to heat his house from his compost heaps, build these massive, great compost heaps with wood chip and run alkathene pipe around and put cold water in, and hot water would come out at 60 degrees Celsius out the top. Absolutely amazing stuff. I'm not quite sure what she means by long-term permaculture heaps. Maybe she's thinking about my kind of woody, windrowy type heaps. Is Claire still there? Where is Claire? I can't see Claire here.
Oh, she's gone.
She gone?
She's gone.
Well, I'll talk to her.
Yeah, you'll see her, won't you? So.
Yeah. But yeah, if anyone's interested, Jean Pain is Jean, Jean, and Pain, like French for bread, Pain. Jean Pain is a really interesting person, and there is a he died back in the 80s, but there is an institute in Belgium which I've wanted to visit for years called the Comité Jean Pain, and it's very inspirational stuff. It's really good. Highly recommended.
So a question from Sarah here. So is pond water no fish fed by a stream? Oh, sorry, no fish and it's fed by a stream. Good to add to the compost pile or the silt at the bottom?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I always my daughter's a marine biologist. I think aren't you, Ruth, a marine biologist? No, she's not marine. But if you're digging stuff out of your pond, what we always do, all the duckweed, not duckweed, the blanket weed and stuff that I fish out, always put it carefully by the side of the pond, and be very mindful, because you will get a lot of stuff crawling out. I did some the other day, and I got, in my first scoop, I got 3 dragonfly larvae coming out. So, I have to carefully put them back. So obviously it's always a bit tricky knowing when to dig out the silt or to, take stuff out.
Autumn is the best time to do it, I think.
Okay.
But I didn't know if it was good to add to compost or not, if there was kind of, good nutrients in it that would be beneficial to use.
Yeah, I think so. I think it would be great. I think it would be excellent. I tend to sort of just use it straight on the soil, but actually I don't have a huge amount, so I tend to just spread it around plants around the pond, my bits. But occasionally, I if there's a lot, I put it in the compost. Yeah.
Okay, great.
So we've had so John asking whether the urine can be used as an accelerator.
Yeah. Absolutely. I save all my urine. I actually, you wanted to know that, didn't you? I actually feed my comfrey plants, because I grow a lot of Russian comfrey, which I then I then put in a barrel. There's another little film I'm making, actually, to show people how to make comfrey juice without the smell, because people, if you're not familiar with it, most people will tell you to put it in a barrel and fill it with water, which is the worst thing to do. You put it in a barrel and you don't put any water in. This is consolida in Italian. So good stuff. And you get a juice that comes out, and you water that down. But I feed my comfrey plants with the urine, because it takes high nitrogen and it converts it into potassium. I also pour woody piles, which is really good. It helps to break them down. And I also pour it some of it onto leaf mold and stuff like that. But so if you've got if you can do that, if you've got really woody piles, then it's great to add urine, because you've got, on the chemical front, that's the high carbon and you're adding high nitrogen, and you want the balance between the two. But it's also wet, obviously, and the woody stuff is dry generally. So it's getting that air and water mix as well. Yeah, urine is great. I've got a whole book on uses for urine. Liquid gold.
Well, I think
I've got,
that might be a
you
good.
can't see, but behind me, there's my books. Most of those books behind me are my compost. That's my compost library. I got loads of books on soil and compost and stuff like that.
Well, that might lead us to on our next workshop, because Vivina has suggested a human manure workshop. So human manure and urine and kind of human waste. That could be a good one.
Great. You and me, Vivina.
So we've got Patricia. What about ants' nests in compost bin?
Just leave them alone. I would just leave them alone. I mean, I always feel blessed if I've got ants in my compost. I think how nice. They actually turn it into the most beautiful compost in the end. But I tend to. I've had that once where I took my took the lid off a Dalek bin and it had been completely taken over by ants. So I just left them to it. That's what I do, I'm afraid. I mean, I like ants more than, you know, anything. Well, not anything, but, you know, I like my ants. So I just let them be, really. I mean, they're not going to harm anyone. If you think, someone once said that the biomass of ants in the world was roughly equivalent to the biomass of humans in the world, and guess which species did the most damage? I think that's been disproved, but the point is great. You know that, you know, they're so beneficial to ecosystems and much.
So there's no need, because I was told to pour water over them, because I was told it was a sign my compost was too dry.
Well, it may be a sign that your compost is too dry, possibly. But yeah, and I don't think a bit of water would harm them. Not boiling water.
No. Cold water.
Cold water. Yeah. But I would just, if you've got one of those plastic bins you can remove.
Yeah.
So the other option is just to take the plastic, just to lift it off, and just start making compost somewhere else. And leave them alone, and then just let them do the rest.
Okay, let them be. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
Right.
I mean, I leave dandelions, and I'm a real softie. But, you know.
Fair enough.
So a message from Debbie here. So so she's from North Somerset, and the council are introducing a charge to remove garden waste, and are trying to encourage people to compost if they don't want to pay the charge. So social media has gone nuts, as you can imagine, with lots saying that they will fly tip or burn their waste on bonfires instead. How can residents be persuaded that they can compost their garden waste?
Well, I spent many years working for Devon County Council, promoting community composting and promoting composting and going to road shows and going to talks, and just, you know, a lot. And of course, you always get people like that. I did advise the council here, Teignbridge Council, many years ago, when they were bringing in a collection service for garden waste. And I did advise them, if they were going to do that, that they should charge for it right from the beginning. And they didn't. And now and all the councils all over the country are bringing in charged collections. And so you're getting this reaction. So they offered something for free, which wasn't sustainable. And now they're having to go through all that problem. I think Fred's had issues with this too in Kent. Might like to say something about that, Fred?
Yeah, of course. So in Kent, Canterbury, where I live, is the only council that hasn't previously charged for collection of garden waste. And this year they've introduced the charge, and it has just exploded on social media and stuff. But I saw that as an opportunity to really promote home composting. So they're going to generate revenue from charge for garden waste. They really need to be pushing and subsidise and incentivise and home composting and promoting it at the same time. And that's very much what I've been trying my very best to push as well. So as long as they balance the introduction of a charge with a way of incentivising home composting, I think it can be a bit of a sweetener.
Yeah, thank you. They said they're going to give people, I think the free compost bins are probably just the Dalek ones, or you can get a subsidised, more expensive bin and more expensive hot bin, they were saying as well. So
yeah,
be interesting to see how it pans out. They're consulting at the moment, so it'll be, yeah.
I think, yeah, this is the issue. This has come up. I mean, it comes up a lot, and I have advised councils around the country, actually, different councils on different things. But the trouble with giving out bins or giving subsidised bins or just giving them out is it really needs to be backed up with the advice on how to use them, because so many bins have been put out and then people don't know what to do. So.
No.
They haven't had good, but that's partly why I did the films with Teambridge Council on using the Dalek bin. You know, it is very tricky to get through to people, because as soon as you've had something for free and it's taken away, people get very pissed off.
Okay, thank you.
But you're happy, you know, if you want to talk to me more about this outside of Zoom, I'm happy to carry on.
Okay, thank you.
So a message from Vivina here. I've put the leaves from the fall season into the compost bin. Would it take more time to decompose than the leaf mold method?
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
I put the leaves from the fall season into the compost bin. Would it take more time to decompose?
Oh, the fall season. Oh,
yeah. Would it take more time to decompose than the leaf mold method?
The quickest way to break down leaves is to kind of put them on the lawn and mow them. So you mix them, or you shred them up and you mix them with grass cuttings, and then you hot compost the whole lot, and then it will break down really, really quickly. But of course, that's probably the quickest way to do it. The leaf mold is a slower method, and that's because you're putting lots of bacteria into it and you're getting heat and you're getting an explosion of bacteria. But if you do leaf mold, it's being broken down by fungi, and it's a slower process. But the material that you get from a slower leaf mold process is fantastic. If you go to Kew Gardens has now got a composting viewing area, which I always go to when I go to Kew. It's my favourite bit, of course. They have got massive piles of leaves, and they even grade them into different varieties. So you get piles of plain leaves, piles of oak leaves, beech leaves, because different leaves take different amounts of time to break down. I think plain leaves take 3 years to really break down, and other ones are quicker. So leaves are a wonderful resource on their own. But if you just want to bulk your compost up, then you can just mix them in with other materials. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So a final one from Fred. Is there anything you would say that shouldn't go in the compost bin?
I mean, I put pretty much everything in.
What about bones, meat and bones and stuff like that?
Yeah, I even put them in. I tend to what I do very often with bones, because I'm not vegetarian, I boil them up for stock, and then I quite often put them in the wood burner and heat them up. I did read years ago that the origin of the word bonfire was bone fire, because if you heat up bones, they're very dry, they're bone dry, and you heat them up, they will then crush and pulverize very easily. They're very, very big, but big bones obviously take, you know, I don't know, probably hundreds of years to break down. But if you can pulverize them a bit, like things like chicken bones, dry them out, crush them up a bit, they will break down quite quickly. Even things like shells, you know, mussel shells and anything like that, they will turn up in the garden for years. There will be a release in the garden of bones of phosphorus and things like shells with calcium, you know, so eggshells, calcium, you know, slow release things. But the more you crush them up, obviously the quicker they will break down. So yeah, pretty much everything I put in. Obviously not plastic and glass and tins and things, you know, the obvious things, but anything compostable.
So sorry, Nicky. So basically, if it's lived and it's organic in nature, it will be fine to put the compost.
Yeah, yeah, with the usual provisos of, you know, you don't put a whole load of it in at once of any one thing, you know. I mean, I've never put. I used to work. My first job I had when I was 16. I used to have a Saturday job working on a composting business in Totnes, and the guy who ran it was a vegetarian, and there used to be a bacon factory in Totnes, and he used to go to the bacon factory and get blood and hair, and he would mix that with spent mushroom compost and all the fruit and veg waste from the market and mix it together, and it was incredible. So he was the inspiration really for everything I do now. And he wrote books. He was called Dick Kitto, and he's written books on composting and organic gardening. But yeah, blood. But you know, if you go to an abattoir, you know, I wouldn't want to do that, you know, and get a lot of anything like that. But
I know you've talked about pervasive pesticides and chemicals. So any advice on that?
That's a really good point, Fred. I mean, I actually don't use manure around here. We get manure delivered to our allotment, and I've stopped using it because I'm really worried about the two highly persistent herbicides, aminopyralids and clopyralids. And unfortunately, they were licensed for use. They were common in the States. Actually, closed down a composting facility in the States, which was contaminated with those herbicides, and then they were licensed over here, and they are used by farmers on broadleaf weed control. So if you're getting manure from a farmer who might have sprayed his fields for killing off docks and thistles and stuff like that, then it will go right through the cattle and through anything, through the silage, and will be toxic in parts per billion. And it's highly persistent and kills things off, which is why I'm really wary about using manures.
So male and female urine, any difference between the two?
That always comes up, yeah. No, it's fine. It's all fine. It's all fine.
Yeah, and you don't need to pour water on the top of them.
I mean, when I'm feeding the comfrey, I tend to mix it about 50-50 with water. But you can water in the book Liquid Gold. I mean, she uses it watered down on plants as well. I mean, you can actually feed lettuces, especially things that like high nitrogen, like lettuces, chard, spinach. Those kind of things will love a bit of watered down pea.
Great.
Good, really
I know
good.
what I'm going to do tomorrow.
Yeah, and pregnant women especially good.
Amazing. So we've got two more questions. So one from Sarah. Are all weeds fine to add to the compost pile as long as they're dried or drowned, even if they've gone to seed? Is that correct?
Well, we've actually banned the word weed in our house because I love my weeds. I mean, they're all wildflowers. I've been trying to organise a festival of weeds, but yeah, I understand what you mean. I mean, there are some very pernicious, you know, aggressive weeds like the couch grass and the bindweed and all the rest of it, which obviously you have to be careful with. The seeded weeds, yeah, of course, you will get weeds. The biggest problem we've had on our site at Proper Job is actually wind-blown seeds landing on top of the more mature compost and growing in the compost. I think the worst weed in the compost is probably the tomato. When I make my composts up with my own stuff, I find it especially if I'm sowing tomatoes, I don't know which ones are the ones which were the volunteers in my compost and which ones were the ones I sowed. So that can be a problem. You know, normally if you're making your own potting composts, then that can be a problem. If you're using the compost on your garden, if you're like me and you're a no digger and you just spread it around thinly around the top of things, then what you're doing, what you can do is just keep an eye on it. And then when I was taught, I had studied organic gardening, and what we did is we hoed all the time. So you hoe, and you hoe little seedling. You actually hoe the soil before you see any weeds. That's what we were taught. You don't hoe weeds, you hoe the soil. And what you do then is if you keep on top of it, you break the capillary action of the soil, and any little emerging weed seeds will sort of dry out in that top bit. And you also conserve the moisture underneath, so it becomes like a barrier layer. So you actually keep the soil below more moist as well. So it's a really good way of conserving water. Hoeing is very underrated and a really good technique.
Wonderful. So one last one was laurel leaves from Patricia. I assume that can you compost laurel leaves?
Oh, laurel. Yeah, we had a laurel. I've got an interesting story about laurel. We were doing, when I was experimenting with food waste in the early days of the Proper Job project, we were composting food waste in old degas freezers. We had freezers that we turned into compost things, which worked really well actually. And then we had an open day, and suddenly the kitchen where we were holding it was inundated with flies. There were flies everywhere. She said, "What's going on?" There are flies everywhere from your compost. So I was really horrified. But they had I thought, oh, I know, they've got a laurel hedge here. So I went and chopped a load of laurel and shoved it into all my compost bins. And then she came out the kitchen about 10 minutes later and said, I don't know what's happened, but there are no flies anymore. They've all gone. So laurel, I don't really understand that, but laurel is full of cyanide. It does have cyanide in it. It's the Victorians used to use it in killing jars for butterflies and things. So it is quite toxic, but it will compost absolutely fine. And we used to shred it up because we did have quite a lot with laurel hedges. You can shred it up. It smells very strongly of almonds. As long as you're outside and in the fresh air, you're not going to kill yourself. But it is very toxic. But nothing. There's so many poisonous plants. Another question I get a lot is this plant is toxic, therefore it can't be composted. But anything will compost. All poisonous plants can be composted, and laurel is actually makes very good compost.